Shalom. This week's Torah portion is the portion of Vayigash, and in it, Yosef, the holy, righteous Joseph, is finally reunited with his family, with his brothers and his father. Now, the Torah has already emphasized to us that there is a very special affection and a very great bond between Yosef, and his brother Benjamin. You can really only imagine the extent of that bond. They were both children to their mother Rachel. They had been separated. They had never met. Joseph had never met his younger brother. And in yet last week's Torah portion, in Miketz, we recall that when Joseph seated all of the brothers according to their age, he made certain that Benjamin would receive 5 times the portion of that of the other brothers. So there was this very special relationship between them, and actually it was, if you recall, through the subterfuge of the cup that Joseph was able to test his brothers and discern their attitudes towards Benjamin and discern how seriously they took the danger that seemingly faced Benjamin. And the wise Joseph was able to gauge this attitude as a measure of whether or not his brothers had truly learned anything from the time of their betrayal of him. Now, in this week's Torah portion of Vayigash, we see that it is following Yehuda's passionate declaration of his father Yaakov, his father Jacob's love, undying love for this youngest son, Benjamin. Joseph becomes totally undone, totally overwhelmed, and that is when he chooses to reveal himself. You know, later in this Torah portion, in chapter 46, verse 21, in the section when all of the names of Jacob's descendants are listed, names of Benjamin's children are listed there as well, and our sages actually illuminate that these Hebrew names, the names of the sons of Benjamin, are actually, they have a secret message. You see, because Benjamin was so obsessed with his love for the absent Joseph, that he actually named all of his children after Yosef. And each one of these Hebrew names, the names of the sons of Benjamin, actually convey some sort of hidden meaning that is associated somehow with Joseph. For example, one of the names is Bela, and that actually comes from the Hebrew root which means to be swallowed up, because Joseph disappeared and was swallowed up amongst the nations. Another son of Benjamin was called Becher, which is from the root of Bechor, the firstborn, because Joseph was the firstborn of his mother. And Naaman, which means that he was exceedingly pleasant. Achi, my brother, and Rosh, he was my head. So all of these names testify to the fact that in every aspect of Benjamin's life, he was totally wrapped up with the fate of his brother, the brother that emerged from the same womb as him, the matriarch Rachel, and even named his children after Joseph in absentia. So now, when Joseph and Benjamin are finally reunited, in chapter 45, in verse 14, we read how they fell upon each other's neck and cried. And it's a very beautiful description, and one that we can easily understand. Now, you know that Rashi, important commentator on the Torah, wrote with divine inspiration and really prophetic enlightenment, and also was very smart, aside from the fact that he had this great illumination of the kind of Ruach HaKodesh of divine inspiration. He also was an extremely wise person, and he points out that the verse tells us that Joseph cried on Benjamin's neck, but you see, if you look at the word in Hebrew, you see that the word neck, tzavarav, for Binyamin, is actually in the plural. So that when Joseph and Benjamin were kissing and hugging and crying over each other, actually, if you want to be proper about the Hebrew, the verse tells us that Joseph cried over Benjamin's necks, plural, whereas Benjamin cried over Joseph's neck in the singular. So the Holy Rashi tells us that this is actually an allusion to the fact that the plural of Benjamin tells us that Joseph was actually crying over the 2 holy temples that in the future would stand in the biblical portion, in the land of Israel, the portion of Benjamin, and ultimately were destined to be destroyed. And that when Benjamin cried on Yosef's neck in the singular, he actually was crying for the tabernacle, that in the future would be standing in the biblical portion of the land of Israel of Joseph, but also would eventually be destroyed. So Rashi explains this unusual usage in Hebrew, the plural of the neck of Benjamin, as if to say his plural necks, because you see there's actually a verse in the Song of Songs that refers to the tzavar, this idea of the neck as being an allusion to the Holy Temple. So Rashi says it's the two necks, the two temples that would stand in the portion of Benjamin over which Joseph was crying. So, you can look at this beautiful tradition, and I think that it's quite lovely, and think that Rashi has here made a very interesting use of the seemingly incongruous Hebrew word, and he's been able to explain to us that it really means something else altogether. But you can also say, come on, why is this whole thing necessary? Why does Rashi have to go to this extent to tell us that they were looking into the future and that they were crying over the tabernacle and the temples? I mean, isn't it enough just to say that they were showing emotion for each other? And isn't it enough just to say that after so many years of being apart and having such dedication and pining and yearning for each other, that this is the reason for their tears? So what is this teaching really coming to tell us? Because after all, nothing is for naught, and if Rashi has this insight into the Holy Torah, and it's the Torah's message itself to tell us that the reunion of Joseph and Benjamin was actually a foreshadowing, or they felt actually in the future, the destruction of the temple. So obviously the first thing that this is meant to convey to us is that they did experience this level of prophecy. But what we really see from this is that their concern was not for each other. Their concern was for the future, and not only of the Jewish people, but really for the destiny, the mission of the Jewish people, the success of their mission. The question was, will their descendants succeed in the national mission, which is making a home for the divine presence in this world where the divine presence will be welcome? So their tears were not sentimental or selfish or self-centered or nostalgic, but rather their tears were a reflection of the cycle of highs and lows that we all go through. And really we all go through so much suffering in our lives and so much travail and so many adventures, just as Joseph and Benjamin did. And the question is whether we can measure success or failure, God forbid, of this national destiny. That's how we measure time, and that's how we truly measure when we take a long, hard look at ourselves, and we look at all of the separation and the anxiety and the pain and the turmoil, and we ask ourselves, if we have to endure this, is it actually worth something? And this is really what Benjamin and Joseph were reflecting upon, whether or not it all means something in the end, whether or not we are acting towards the rectification of all humanity by bringing the presence of the divine presence into the world. And this was their concern, and this is what they were seeing in the future. This is what they were gauging and asking themselves about and measuring, not themselves or their own pain upon separation, but the question for the future of every generation of their descendants of the people of Israel. How are we going to measure up? Is it all worth something? If the temples are going to be destroyed, then how are we going to succeed? Because the question is, and of course it's not answered yet, and this is also what they saw as the generations unfold, will we succeed in making a home for the divine presence in this world where God will once again be welcomed?